Now I call upon Shri Pradeep Singh Mehta ji to give his views on the subject and enlighten us. Please give him a big round of applause.
Thank you very much. Very grateful to India Policy Foundation and the Forum of Federations for having invited me here. Please pardon me, I've got a bad throat, and I hope I would be audible to the extent possible. As the chair has pointed out, my paper has also been circulated. It's actually not my paper. It's a paper which has been derived at after several rounds of consultations, both through e-groups as well as through roundtables. And so a lot of thought has gone into it, and a lot of what I was going to say has already been said by speakers in the opening session, the first session, and this session as well. So what I will try to do is not be repetitive, but to point out certain nuances of what has already been said. Dr. Jadhav spoke about a very clear structure. I'm not going to get down into nuts and bolts of what the structure would be. But the first thing what I would like to note is that we have entered a new era in India. And to add a very famous dictum by a noted Austrian economist, creative destruction. And this is what I would like to speak about is our dynamic Prime Minister has decided to scrap this commission and to create a new one, unlike what was said earlier by a floor intervener that in 91 when we adopted reforms, the Director General of Technology and Development was wound up because it was no longer necessary. It was a licensing body. But the fact is that from the morning itself, I mean, all speakers have spoken on the fact that we require a central body which can do at the least perspective planning. This is very important, and also scenario building. Let's not throw the baby out with the bath water. Even the last planning commission had done a lot of work in this direction. Dr. Jadhav, you forgot to mention. Even the 12th plan formulation was done through a very wide consultation. First time ever in the planning process. Mr. Surendra, to answer your point, the kind of consultation went out, they received about 20,000 inputs from all over the country, from deep down in villages in Kerala up to even Himachal and Jammu and Kashmir. And that was an excellent process which was adopted. Now, how far that was translated into the vision document which came out of the plan is something which we've yet to see. Secondly, what the Planning Commission last engaged in was something which is being recommended again and again by all the speakers here is scenario planning, scenario building. What would happen if this happens? If this does not happen, then what is it that we should do? Now, all that institutional memory is up there on the website as well as in the Yojana Bhavan. So my plea is, let's not throw the baby out with the bath water. A lot of good work was done. Now, the fact is that the Planning Commission was asked to rejuvenate and resurrect itself, but it never happened because of this. The biggest problem, if you look at the problem of the baggage that the Planning Commission had, and which has created a lot of, I would say, antagonism, was its financial allocation duties. Literally, I mean, even Narendra Modi has said this, I had to go with my begging bowl before the Yojana Bhavan and to listen to unelected representatives. Now, this is not as when he was the Chief Minister of Gujarat. Rajiv Gandhi, the late Prime Minister, even called it a bunch of jokers. Kamal Nath said these are armchair advisors. So even those who were in the government had often found Planning Commission very difficult to deal with. Mr. T.S.R. Subramaniam, who's not here at this moment, in his autobiography, wrote about how a particular joint secretary in the finance ministry held up huge amount of reforms. He's that same fellow who has created a bad name for the Planning Commission. When Kamal Nath, the then road minister, said these are armchair advisors, and I may take the name, it is Gajendra Haldia. The amount of antagonism which he's created, because for everything possible he used to find a negative opinion. And that is something which a very large number of ministries, whether power ministry or road ministry or whatever it is, they found out. So this is the kind of baggage that we have dealt, we've come with, and therefore the kind of antagonism which exists against the Planning Commission. And the dire necessity, as I said, the recognition by the Prime Minister that we need a new body is of a very widely held opinion in the country, there is no doubt about it. Second point, and this is something which I found missing from the morning chairman. This is a very tragic thing, but our constitution provides for district planning committees. But nobody has spoken about it. Mr. Surendran, you spoke about, you didn't mention that the constitution provides for district planning committees, but they are dysfunctional. They are there either naam ke vaste in some places, if at all, but they just don't function at all. So our sort of fathers of our constitution had this in mind, that planning has to start from the grassroots. And this is the other thing which I wanted to point out to you, is that that whole structure has to be, revived. We spoke about the Interstate Council, Govind Rao spoke about it. It's another constitutional body which can be empowered to carry out all of these functions. But our suggestion is to follow a bit of what China has done, is they scrapped their planning process and they scrapped 2 or 3 other commissions and established a National Development and Reform Commission. The word planning was not used in the body, but that still does all the planning work in China itself. And that is what our suggestion is. It should be represented by, the kind of membership should be inclusive of chief ministers of states, which can be done on a rotational basis, which is being done in many cases. If the way our Prime Minister has put forward the doctrine that the country is being governed by Prime Minister and Chief Ministers and not by the Prime Minister and his cabinet, that doctrine has to be put into this whole process, where you create that kind of ownership of the body, which is a truly quasi-federal body. It cannot be a federal body. Rupak Chattopadhyay is not here, the other co-organizer. But India is not a federal country in that sense. We are a unitary nation. We are a union of states. We are not, that was also debated whether to call it United States of India or Union of States. But we've decided, looking at our history of fissiparous tendencies in the country, if you look at it, the centuries of foreign rule, whether it was British or Mughals or even before that, it's all because all of us were continuously fighting each other, city-states. And therefore, the founding fathers and the governments in the past have realized that we need to keep a unitary nature if we have to keep this country intact as a country. So let us not forget, the fact is that the Constitution does not give us a federal nature, it gives us a quasi-federal nature. And there are a lot of powers where a central government can take. What has happened is that the Planning Commission itself has been found to be an antithesis to the federal nature of the country. The kind of follies which I pointed out, particularly coming out from financial allocations, and what Govind Rao spoke about was centrally sponsored scheme, 200 plus, and so on. They all decided here, sitting in Yojana Bhavan, without understanding, as Surendranji rightly pointed out, there is a difference between Coimbatore and Jaipur. How can you have the same scheme operating in Salem as against in, say, Bakura or wherever it is? So a lot of things have to be left to the states, and this is what has been pleaded again and again. Now, one of the criticism that we heard was that if you just keep it as a think tank, will it be heeded to by the states at all or not? You have to create that shared narrative. A shared narrative, as I said, if the new body itself comprises of some chief ministers on a rotational basis, and not necessarily those belonging to the ruling party, but opposition parties as well, in order to keep that the richness of our polity, the richness of our democracy, it is important that there is a shared narrative and a shared ownership. And I agree with many, one important suggestion which is made by many, is that you empower the Finance Commission to do the allocation, but in consultations with this new body. That will lead to that kind of shared narrative which is missing at the moment. that one particular weakness which has been pointed out by all is that Planning Commission was heeded to in the past because it had the money power and it could twist the arms of the states to do what they were required to do. 2 minutes? Yeah. Thank you. Secondly, and something which I want to repeat for the sake of emphasis, is that it requires quality personnel. Now, on government salary scales, you may not get all the quality personnel. So therefore, what we have suggested, and something which has been obliquely mentioned or generally mentioned, was that you have a large number of think tanks, civil society organizations feeding into this central think tank, which should be a lean body. At the most, maybe 8 or 9 members with a staff of no more than 30 people in order who could then manage the kind of research which is required and that council. The new body could also serve as the Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister. It could also be the Secretariat for the National Development Council. By the way, Dr. Jadhav, the National Development Council, unlike the process which is adopted by the Interstate Council, doesn't function well. It becomes a political jamboree all the time. Chief ministers come and make things. Under the Interstate Council, there are zonal councils, and what happens is the chief secretaries of those states are first called to discuss all the agenda, including the points. So that is the kind of process which has to be done, even for a rejuvenated National Development Council, that you get hold of all the chief secretaries of the states and the relevant secretaries who can have a 2-day brainstorming in order to then feed the chief minister. This is what you have to say instead of coming and making a political statement. I'm just about to conclude, sir. A very important thing that we've noticed, which is quite absent in India, this is what we would expect a new think tank to do, to serve as a repository of knowledge of what is happening in each state. Today, states do not know about what is happening well and on an ad hoc basis or on a kind of need-to-know basis, that there has to be, the new body should be able to have a comparative picture. And I'll just give you an example. If you want to open a unit anywhere, most state governments have established a single window service. But how is it functioning? What are the kind of problems each is facing? Is something which, unless they learn from states which have done better, they would not know. The Department of Industrial Policy and Promotion has got a report done by one of the big consultancies. It is on the website. So these are the kind of things which the new body could do. With that, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much, and let me thank all of you once again for this opportunity.